Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So as always, just a huge thank you to everyone who's been following, everyone who has subscribed. Please, if you're coming across this channel from TikTok, please feel free to hit the subscription button. It's just at the top there, it doesn't cost you anything. I'll never ask you guys for money, but a subscription is always free, and it just really helped me out, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate every single one of you who have really been there since the start of this channel. It's actually come up as the year anniversary, which this week, which is amazing. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who has been watching since day dot. I never thought I'd still be doing this after a year, but you guys have sort of been a lifesaver for me in many ways over the past year. The ones that have been watching since day one. That's just mainly due to the, stuff that's happened in my personal life over the past year or so. Like I said, you guys have been absolutely amazing. So obviously, as promised, I have got a real good story and a real deep dive into the story for a video that's coming up, and obviously we're going to be celebrating the year anniversary of the channel. But on today's case, we're going to be focusing on a similar sort of theme as we was last week, and that's obviously people who dispatch their families. Today we're going to be focusing on the story of a young girl called Piedad Martínez del Àguila. I think some of you may have heard of this case, especially if you're watching from Spain. You may remember this case. You may have heard about it in the ethos somewhere. If you don't, then sit in and buckle down, because this one is quite surprising. It's quite a sad story, really. I mean, obviously, all the stories that we hear on these sort of channels, they are sad in their own way, but this one is quite tragic. So, with all that said and done, like I said, just a huge thank you to you all for watching, and we're going to be getting into the story of Piedad. So, Piedad Martínez de Àguila, she was born in 1953, and that was to her father Andres and her mother Antonia. And she also had two older brothers by this point. So there was Jose Antonio, he was born in 1949, and Manuel, he was born in 1951. Now, the family lived in a small village on the province of Murcia in the southeast of Spain. And Andres come from a rural background, and this meant that he followed into the family business of farming. And he worked really long hours during this time, but he was also, it was a massive struggle for the family to make ends meet, and there was never enough money for him to be able to treat his children, to treat his wife. He was spending up to 12 hours a day working his guts out onto the farm and not really have anything to show for it at the end of the day, or the end of the week, whenever the pay packet was. And I think it's something that a lot of us can attest to. I know I can for sure, and I'm sure a lot of you guys that are watching, you can attest to that sort of feeling. But he soldiers on, and he has to for his family. Now, Antonia, she was a stay-at-home mum, and she had dreams of moving away to a larger city, and this was to seek a higher standard of living and better opportunities for her children. Now, around this time that we're talking about, many factories, they began opening around Spain. People began moving over as Spain was becoming more industrialised, and this presented better work opportunities for people. And so naturally they were moving to Spain to take advantage of these new opportunities. And Andres was then offered a job as a bricklayer, and this initially started off really well. He was getting a little bit more money to support his family, and he was helping build houses for the new people that were moving to the country. Now, Antonia believed that living there would mean her children would have better opportunities for themselves. As Spain's industrialization, this created more work. Now, unfortunately, over the next few years, she gave birth to a further 7 children, so their family ended up as a family of 10. A family of 12, sorry, if you include the parents. And whatever little money Andres earned, this just basically went onto his rising family costs. Now, by 1965, the 3 eldest children, they ended up having to give up all of their education and also find work to provide for their rising family. So by the beginning of 1965, Antonia is now pregnant with her 10th child. And she initially gave birth to a son, Jesus, in 1955, Kristen in 1957, Manuela in 1959, Andreas in 1960, Juan Santa, who was also known as just Santa, in 1961, Mariano in 63, and finally Maria Carmen, who was born at the end of 1965. Now, the eldest son, Jose, he was now 16. He got a job as an apprentice bricklayer. And 14-year-old Manuel, he began work as a metal layer. Piedad, she was now 12, and because she was the oldest daughter, she was expected to basically be the second stay-at-home parent. She was described as any other 12-year-old girl at this point. She loved going out with her friends. She loved playing with them, playing with her dolls, playing with her toys. And all of this gets taken away from her. She has to go and now stay at home to not only help her mother, but she's got to feed her younger siblings. She's got to change them. She's got to bath them. She's got to make sure that they're going to school. She's also got to do this while maintaining the household chores, so like washing, ironing, cleaning, blah, blah, blah. And to top all of that off, to earn a little bit of extra money for the household, she also has a part-time job. She's a 12-year-old girl. Now, she done this and she earned money by polishing motorcycle parts. Now, Antonia at the time, she would go door to door. So she would be selling door to door, cooking up big batches of food and going from neighbour to neighbour and earning money that way. And she was doing this while she was heavily pregnant. On December the 4th, 1965, and just basically started as any other day for the family. But by the evening, the baby of the family, 9-month-old Maria Carmen, she just suddenly died. No explanation. There were obviously some signs that only a half hour before she started developing a rash, and eventually this turns into blackouts. She starts convulsing, and finally she passes away. This is all within half an hour. And obviously Antonia, she's beside herself. Andres is shocked, like, what is going on? Now, this was particularly upsetting because this wasn't their first child that died. There was another baby that was born sometime before, who had died at birth. But she was seemingly a healthy, happy baby up until this point. Like, they couldn't compute with this. The doctor comes over to do the death certificate, and he gives a diagnosis of meningitis after listening to the family talk of the little baby symptoms. He says, oh, she must have had meningitis, puts it down as this, and off he goes and leaves them to it. Now, it wasn't until 5 days later, on December the 9th, so the next child along, 2-year-old Mariano, he begins displaying very similar symptoms to his baby sister. And only half an hour later, Mariano has died. Once again, this is put down to meningitis. And it wasn't until December the 14th, so 10 days after Maria had died, 5 days after Mariano, the next child along, so that was 4-year-old Santa, or Santo as he was known, he dies exactly the same way as his 2 siblings. And police are now starting to be suspicious. There are 3 children in the same family die within a 10-day space of each other, all from the exact same thing, all from the exact same sort of worrying conditions. So the doctors, they refused to sign a death certificate, and it was then theorised that the children may have been suffering from an allergic reaction of some sorts. So the surviving family were then taken into hospital. They were placed on a ward. Various tests were done to see what they could be possibly allergic to. None of these tests come back conclusive, and the family were sent on their way. And 2 weeks later, 5-year-old Andreas, he becomes ill, and he sadly passes away on January the 4th of 1966. Now, like I said, these children, they were all said to have been in incredibly good health. They were acting as a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 9-month-old should have been acting. There was the only thing that was noted that was before they died, they had died in ascending age of order. Now, the children reportedly began showing symptoms of the rash. Like I said, there were bruise-like marks that were getting darker as time progressed on. They would then develop various purple spots all over their body, and they developed a real high fever. This was followed by some blackouts. This went into convulsions, and eventually they were dying. And it, like I said, within the space of 30 minutes. Now, with the finding of the bodies, with these findings and all this new information that was coming out, the police and the doctors, they decided that they needed to run further tests on the children's organs. This meant that the bodies had to be exhumed, and so they go ahead and do this. They look at the children's organs, and the organs come back that there's definitely been some sort of poisoning. What they don't know is what with. So that's their next port of call. And eventually doctors find traces of DDT and potassium cyanide. So it was then concluded that the children had been deliberately poisoned, and these findings were then sent to the police. Now, meanwhile, the family were being ostracised by their neighbours, who now believed that the family had a curse on them, or there was a possibility that they had a contagious disease, and, you know, no one else in the neighbourhood wanted the same disease. They didn't want their children to die like the family were having. And doctors then decided to conduct experiments using guinea pigs and dogs. Now, this was to ascertain how much of this lethal potency would be needed to kill someone. I don't know how they can compare guinea pigs to a human being or a dog to a human being, but there we go. Now, they also need to be sure that if the victims had taken this cocktail by accident, or if they'd been purposely poisoned. Now, following the experiments, it was concluded that the children had been deliberately poisoned, and these findings were then sent to police. Now, naturally, the first suspects in this case were the parents, and Anders and Antonia are eventually arrested. And they're quickly ruled out. Antonia, who is now heavily pregnant again, she was placed onto a ward because she was deemed as not fit to stand trial. And Anders was basically taken in for questioning. He was then sent to a mental health unit for evaluation, and they basically concluded that he knew nothing about this. You know, he was just a devastated father who was just basically trying to do the best for his family. Now, a journalist who was working for Spain's biggest magazine at the time, he gets wind of the family's misfortune, and he's sent out to interview the 6 surviving children. Now, 6-year-old Manuela, he became convinced that he was going to be the next child to die. You know, he had noticed a pattern of his younger siblings. The journalist basically had to reassure him that this wasn't going to happen, this wasn't the case. And it was noticed that 12-year-old Piedad, she was eerily calm during this whole process, and this put a lot of suspicion onto Piedad. And the journalist put forward this theory to the police that Piedad was the one that was responsible for her siblings' deaths. And he basically said that, you know, this young girl should have been made responsible for the care of her younger siblings instead of being able to go out and do things that a 12-year-old girl should be doing. She's instead at home, cooking, cleaning, doing everything a mother should be doing. Now, an inspector in charge of the case, he then devised a plan, and this was his way of trying to get Piedad to start talking. So he takes Piedad to a bar, which I find really bizarre anyway. When I was reading this, I found this incredibly bizarre, but here we go. So he takes Piedad to a bar, and this was to engage in conversation with her. Now, during this conversation, he pretends to throw chloride into Piedad's drink, and this was in the shape of a ball. Now, initially, she found this really amusing. She's joking with him, and he goes to do it again, and he keeps repeating this process, and eventually she becomes really angry by this. And he then tells her to drink it, and Piedad refuses, and he tells her that she now understood the potential harm of those actions. Under pressure, Piedad knew she was described as quite an intelligent girl, so she knew that the game was up. She basically tells him everything. She tells him that she's the one responsible for her siblings' deaths. But she insists that the first 3 were by the request of her mother. So she's saying that Antonia had come to her and told her to murder the younger 4 because she just couldn't cope. And she's saying that, so I'd done this with 3 of them, but the 4th, I just had an overwhelming desire to do this without my mother asking. She told how she would combine metal cleaning agents with rat poison, which was then mixed into a cocktail. This was then added to milk, and this milk was fed to her siblings. Piedad then, she was placed into a psychiatric unit where she elaborated a further 5 different accounts of what had actually happened. All of them were woven in with the actual true facts, but there were certain elements that the police were like, okay, but last week you said this, and now you're saying this, like where the truth was still in there somewhere. Now, each one was said to have contradicted the other, but like I said, there was always an element of the true facts. And the only thing that remained consistent was that Piedad remained calm and that her mother was the one that was initially to blame for this. And don't get me wrong, reading this, I feel a little bit sorry for Piedad. I felt a little bit sorry for her reading this. Like, her mum should never have put her in that position. I understand this whole entire time, like the generation that we're talking about, there was a massive surge in very large families after World War II. You know, my grandparents themselves, both of them are from a family of 6 or 7 children, which was really, really common during the 1940s, 50s, 60s. So I kind of get that. But on the same flip of the coin, I don't think her mum should have really put her in that position where she was 12 years old. She should never have been in a position where she had to look after her baby brothers and sisters. She should still have been allowed to have some sort of childhood, you know, do the household chores. We've all done that when we were children, to help out with the household, but not act as a caregiver and a parent when you're not even ready psychologically to be a parent. It's a little bit too much for a 12-year-old to cope. That's saying I'm not condoning what she actually went on to do, but I'm just elaborating my thoughts and feelings on this case. Now, police eventually accepted her side of the story. They decided that Piedad had acted independently, and eventually Piedad, she confessed that Antonia had no part in this whatsoever. She confesses that she had been overburdened with what she was being asked to do, which, like I said, and she was aiming to murder the rest of her siblings so she could just go out and have fun like she was supposed to be doing. Now, Piedad's story was printed by the journalist in a magazine called El Caso, and now this story went on to sell thousands and thousands of copies all throughout Spain. And all of these stories, they printed that Piedad was this strange, ironic, she was sly and things like that. And due to her age, she wasn't actually able to stand trial. I'm not 100% sure what the laws in Spain are now in regards of crimes like this, but obviously back in those days, they didn't see that a 12-year-old child was fully capable of this. So Piedad, she wasn't able to stand trial. She ended up being sent to a convent. Now, she was said to have found solace with the staff and the other children in this convent. So obviously one that was voted out by the police. And she was described throughout the whole time as polite and really well mannered. She got on with everyone. She also grew an affinity of knitting, and she was always said to have never really been far away from her little knitting bag. And this became a real passion, a hobby of hers. Now, Piedad's family, they tried to move on from this whole deal, and they couldn't escape this. Um, many years, the press just followed them, whatever they were trying to do. The press were following them. The two oldest brothers, Jose and Manuel, they attempted to become a singing duo. And initially, they found a little bit of success. They toured around Spain. They had a manager, and eventually it came out that these were the brothers of Piedad. People stopped going to their concerts. The duo were short-lived. But Manuel, he soon got a performing bug, and he just wanted to be famous. He wanted to be seen as something that wasn't related to Piedad, so he instead then tries to become a bullfighter. And this, again, was really short-lived, mainly because he couldn't escape from being Piedad's older brother. Now, with this in mind, both the brothers, they carry on thick as thieves, and eventually they turn into a life of crime. So it literally starts off with really petty stuff. They steal a few bikes, they steal a few cars, and they get in trouble with the police. Now, older brother, he basically stops. After he gets in trouble with the police, he stops doing this. But Jose, Manuel, the younger brother, he's the one that steps away from the life of crime. It's Jose that he eventually gets sentenced to a life imprisonment, and this is after murdering a taxi driver. In 1978, he, along with other inmates, attempted a prison breakout. They eventually were caught and given further sentences. He attempted this with 15 other inmates. They were really successful in digging a tunnel, and this was going under the prison into the grounds and further on. But the prison guards were one step ahead, and they eventually ended up with a bigger sentence than what they already had. And I couldn't find any information on regards of what happened after this, whether he was ever released from prison or if he had died behind bars. Anders and Antonia, they carried on as best they could. They were still rejected by society. Society just didn't want to know them. They were the cursed family. They were shunned. And over time, Anders, he began losing his sight really sadly, and he went fully blind, and this resulted in him losing his job. In the progress of losing his job, he began sinking below the poverty line, and he sadly passed away in the early 1980s. I couldn't find any information on surviving children. I couldn't find any information on Antonia, and it's really unclear what actually happened to Piedad. So there's some stories that claim that Piedad, she was eventually released some point in the 80s or early 90s, and this is after spending some time in an adult prison. It's said that she embraced a heavily religious lifestyle after her release. She went on to become a law-abiding citizen and stayed on the narrow path and whatnot, but other stories claim that she was released. She just couldn't cope with life on the outside, and she actually lived on the streets and changed her name to something else. But like I said, I can't find any definitive answer on which of those is true. I kind of hope that it's not, obviously 100%. I really hope that it's not the latter. I even though I don't have time for religion, I kind of hope that she chose the religious path, and I hope she was able to try and heal from what had happened. That's saying, obviously, I don't condone what she did. What she did was wrong, but on the same flip side, I kind of, like reading this, I kind of feel quite a bit sorry for her. I'm not gonna lie, but it doesn't excuse murdering your baby brothers and sisters. That being said, so as always, just a huge thank you to everyone. I really hope that this is a story that you guys are not familiar with. If you are, please feel free to leave a comment down below. Kind of a shocker, but I felt that it was important to cover this case, because if you do actually Google or put in the search bar Piedad's name, there are a few other YouTubers who have covered this case, but a lot of the times it's obviously Spain, people in Spain that are covering the story. So I just wanted to bring this to the attention of the English speaking language. That being said, obviously they probably find a lot more information. They're able to find a lot more information than what I was able to find out. If you actually speak Spanish, then feel free to watch one of their videos and comment down below if there's any information you feel that I should have added in. But like I said, I was limited on what information I could find that was actually written in English, because a lot of what was put out on the internet, mainly Spanish articles, and it just basically meant trying to copy and paste that into Google to translate it into English. So I had to rely on the very few English articles that I could find of this story. I really appreciate you guys being here. Just a huge thank you. Please, if you are watching without subscribing, please feel free to subscribe. And I will see you guys very, very soon for the extra special True Crime Story with Silhouette. Going to be a real long video coming up to focus on the year anniversary of the channel, and B, obviously there is going to be a second reason of this really long video. But anyway, before I said and done, just a huge thank you to you all, and I'll see you guys real soon. Take care, stay safe.